All right, so it's well established that we have a very diverse country, and that we have seen over our country's history an influx of immigration. And what role this plays in politics, really we see best through reapportionment, which occurs once every 10 years after the census is conducted. And this is when the 435 seats in the House of Representatives are reallocated to reflect each state's proportion of the total population of our country. So, for example, if the census finds that a state has 5% of our country's population, then that state will receive 5% of the seats in the House. And because this number, 435, is explicitly written in the Constitution, unless there is a constitutional amendment ratified, then this number always needs to be fixed, meaning that if one state sees a huge influx in its population and gains representation, then that means that another state must lose some of its representation. For example, after the data from the 2010 census was collected, the state of Nevada actually gained 2 districts, and they gained 4 seats in the House compared to their original 2. And on the flip side of that, the state of New York actually lost 2 of its seats. And so you need to sort of balance out the districts and representatives from each state so that no matter what, it always totals 435. So that again speaks to the fact of the importance of everyone participating in that census, because there needs to be an accurate representation in order to determine the seats in Congress. Another trend that we've seen over the last few years that has sort of led into a bunch of different political issues is what's known as the graying of America. And I'm not sure if this shows up on a test, but just in case it does, just understand that this is the concept where citizens over 65 years old is now the fastest growing age group in the United States, and that's because the life expectancy continues to increase due to advances in medicine. And with that baby boomer generation, we're starting to see those people become the biggest, essentially, demographic of our total population. So what effect does this growing number of older people have on our society? Well, one of them that particularly works its way into politics is the effect on Social Security. So in 1960, when Social Security first was established, and if you remember, this is the pay-as-you-go system, so we working Americans are now paying the Social Security for those people who are receiving those benefits of being 65 years and older. Back when it was established, 5.7 workers contributed to the Social Security of one retiree. In 2010, that number had dwindled down to 3 workers were paying into the Social Security for each retiree. The estimates predict that in 2040, there will only be 2 workers who are contributing to each retiree's Social Security collection. And so basically what that means is in order to keep up with the standard that was set back in 1960, these 2 workers are going to have to pay more, or the Social Security allotment is going to be less. And so that is a hot topic in politics right now. So in terms of hot topics and how people feel about certain issues like Social Security, how Americans learn about politics and how they develop their beliefs and values is through a process known as political socialization. And as it says, this is a process through which an individual acquires his or her particular political orientations, his or her, sorry for the typo, knowledge, feelings, and evaluations regarding his or her political world. It's the manner in which people get their political values that ultimately influence which political party they will support and then which candidates they will vote for. And so politics, like all behaviors, particularly if you are a sociologist, is a learned behavior, okay? So what that basically means is that there's not predisposed genes that determine if someone is conservative or if someone is liberal, but rather your belief about politics and your ideology is a process that you go through, and some of those agents in acquiring these include the family, mass media, and school. Other sociological factors including family, income, occupation, school and level of education, sex, age, and religious and ethnic background can all contribute to the different beliefs that someone might have about a particular issue. The region of the country also influences a person's value system. And oftentimes, people point to the South, particularly the Bible Belt, as people from there are going to have more conservative beliefs about social issues. Oftentimes in the Pacific Northwest, that tends to be categorized as a more liberal or moderate sphere. California is really interesting because California is very heterogeneous in terms of its political ideology when we look at the state as a whole. A lot of people assume that Southern California is very, very liberal and often put that label on there. But Orange County, different pockets within Southern California are some of the most conservative areas in the entire country. Even looking up north north from Southern California, looking at the Bay Area, you of course have really liberal pockets, but then as we have the technology boom and money plays a role, we see more conservative pockets as well. So California is actually quite an interesting case study of political ideology and how people feel. But the process through which people develop those feelings, again, is known as political socialization. And the media also is a factor that determines your values. So, for example, my grandmother, before she passed, would turn on Fox News and listen to Bill O'Reilly every single day. And so by the time she passed away several years ago, her political beliefs matched and mirrored Bill O'Reilly's because she was so influenced by the media that she was watching. There's probably other people who only watch MSNBC and really start to develop those same beliefs. And then lastly, studies have found that the family is the primary influence. So it would be very rare if, and not to say that this doesn't happen, but it would be really rare for two very conservative parents to raise someone who ended up being extremely liberal. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but the family definitely is the number one influence. So how do you determine, or how does the media and politicians, how do they determine how people feel about certain issues? The way that you measure public opinion most often is through different polls. And the Gallup poll is definitely the most well-known way to measure public opinion. Kind of an interesting story. So the Gallup poll was first introduced in 1932, and George Gallup was a man whose mother-in-law was running for some elected office in Iowa, and he wanted to see what the odds of her winning were, and so he just went around and asked people who they were likely to vote for, and it gave them an idea of what she needed to do to win the election. And from that simple way of asking people who they were likely to vote for, turns into the Gallup polls, which are definitely the most frequently utilized measurement of public opinion by politicians and media. In order to make statements about what the American people believe and want, it would be inaccurate or unrealistic, I guess, to ask every single American. So instead, the Gallup polls choose a sample, which is a relatively small proportion of people who are chosen to represent the whole. So in my sociology class, when we do our unit on social research methods, I explain to the students that whether we're talking about high school students or men or women, black, white, you can't survey all those people, so you need to decide how much is enough to accurately represent that total population. And then you definitely need to make sure that you take a random sampling, which operates on the principle that everyone should have an equal probability of being selected as part of the sample. So for example, if you are taking a random sample, 13% of the people whom you survey should be African American because African Americans make up 13% of our total population. If you're conducting a poll, 50% of the respondents should be women because women make up 50% of our population. No matter how many people, no matter how accurate a poll might claim to be, there is always what's known as the sampling error, and this is the degree of confidence that the sample represents the population. So for example, a poll of 1,500 to 2,000 respondents has a sampling error of plus or minus 3, which means that 95% of the time the poll results are within 3% of what the entire population thinks. So obviously you would like a really small sampling error or a high degree of confidence that your poll is representing or reflecting accurate results. So I actually want to pull up the internet right now, move this out of the way. There's still the Gallup website is pulled up in front of you. You can go to the Gallup website any time of the day, and they still conduct polls daily. And again, this all goes back to that random man in Iowa. And there's different categories: politics, economy, well-being, world. And they are constantly inundating people with this is what public opinion is. So for example, this was a poll that had results shared on October 16th, 2014, that basically said, and the hub is in Princeton, New Jersey, that there's no preference by the American people in terms of wanting a divided or a one-party government. And the results say that currently 30% of Americans say it is better to have a one-party government, 28% say a divided government is better, and the highest percentage, 37%, says it makes no difference. So because those percentages are all pretty near each other, that's why they say basically there's no preference or it doesn't matter. And then they take all this data that they collect, they put into different forms, they compare it to different years, and so politicians and the media use this information to make political decisions or to take political actions. And you can see that from that one simple survey, they have sort of corroborated to create a lot of information. Results from this Gallup poll are based on telephone interviews conducted in September with a random sample of 1,017 adults, age 18 and older, living in the United States and the District of Columbia. The results based on the total sample of national adults. The margin of sampling error is plus or minus 4 percentage points. And so you can see that they elaborate on what methods they used in particular. They even went into how the interviews were conducted. And we'll talk about who the people are who actually conduct this information when we look at our